I sat on a wooden bench outside St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah, my hands locked so tight together my knuckles ached. The spring air smelled faintly of salt from the river, and the late sun caught in the glass of the tall building behind me, but none of it reached me. Inside, behind those walls, my fiancé Daniel lay in the ICU, pale against the machines that now did what his body could not. Minutes earlier, I had kissed his forehead, whispered goodbye, and stepped out because a nurse in scrubs told me to. No softness, no kindness, just, "You'll have to wait outside." And in that moment, I felt erased. I wasn't just a visitor. I wasn't just a stranger walking in off the street. He was my fiancé. 6 weeks from now, we were supposed to stand beneath an oak tree and say vows we had been writing in secret, each trying to surprise the other. But here, in the place where he might draw his last breath, the word fiancé meant nothing. The nurse didn't look at me twice, didn't recognize me as the one who knew every scar on his hands from years of working with wood, every cadence of his laugh, every dream he had whispered to me in the dark. In their eyes, I was no one. People walked by carrying flowers, talking about dinner plans, tapping at their phones. Their voices were ordinary, soft, even cheerful. I sat there hollow, knowing the man I loved was fading. Yet to everyone else I was invisible. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been present at the most important moment of your life and been treated like you didn't exist? If you know that kind of silence, if you've lived through that kind of dismissal, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes sharing those moments is the only way not to feel entirely alone in them. The waiting area was too cold, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting, but what stung worse was the way the staff leaned close to other families, updating them with sympathy, while brushing past me without a glance. I had spent years building a life with Daniel, and here, in the place where he might be taken from me, I was treated as though I was temporary, replaceable, unnecessary. My fiancé was fighting for his life, and I was reduced to a shadow in his story. I stood, trying to shake the numbness, and walked toward the vending machines at the far end of the corridor. That's when I heard it. 2 doctors stepped out of a side hallway, their voices low but distinct, not knowing I was within earshot. One said, "Does his real family know yet? They're listed in the original file." The other replied, "Not yet. And if she finds out before he wakes up, it's going to get complicated." I froze. Real family. Original file. If she finds out, they weren't talking about test results, they weren't talking about recovery, they were talking about me. And about something or someone I had never been told about. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't move. The unfairness I had been drowning in, that bitter taste of being treated like nothing, suddenly sharpened into something else. I wasn't irrelevant. I was being kept in the dark. I leaned against the wall, the paint cold against my back, my mind replaying every time Daniel had brushed off questions about his childhood, every time he said his family wasn't in the picture, every time he shifted the subject when I asked about where he came from. I had believed him. I had built our future on his words. But now, in this hallway, I realized there were truths I was never meant to know. I should have been thinking about his condition, about his fragile breathing, about whether he'd live through the night. Instead, I was replaying those whispered words until they hollowed me out. Real family. Original file if she finds out. I didn't storm after the doctors. I didn't demand answers right then. I stood very still, my jaw tight, my heart racing. Because I knew once I started asking questions, nothing between Daniel and me would ever be the same. If you've ever discovered something that made you question everything you thought was solid in your life, you'll understand why I kept listening to those words long after they were gone. And if this story already feels like one you don't want to let go of, you can follow along by subscribing. I'll be telling it as honestly as I can, because secrets like these have a way of tearing through more than one life. Through the glass window of the ICU, I caught sight of Daniel's still hand resting against the white blanket. The man who had built me a rocking chair for our anniversary, the man who told me once that family wasn't blood but choice, was lying there, surrounded by machines, while strangers whispered about a family I'd never been allowed to know. And that was the moment I realized I couldn't just sit and wait. I wasn't leaving here with silence as my answer. I had to know. And once you decide you have to know, there is no turning back. The night dragged on in uneven stretches, each hour stretched thin by the sound of monitors and the shuffle of shoes down polished hallways. I sat in the hard chair outside Daniel's room, staring through the narrow window at his pale face. The man who once lifted me effortlessly onto his shoulders when I complained about sore feet on long walks now looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. His chest rose and fell with the help of machines, and I hated that I couldn't tell if he was fighting or only being carried. I thought about the words I'd overheard: real family, original file. They clung to me heavier than grief itself. Real family? Who were they talking about? Daniel had always told me there wasn't anyone. He said he grew up without parents, without siblings, moving from place to place. He used to joke that he built furniture because it was the only way to create something solid in a life that kept shifting. And I had believed him, every word, because he never gave me a reason not to. Now I sat here, replaying conversations and noticing silences I once ignored. When a nurse came by with a clipboard, I asked, "Is there any update for Daniel?" She didn't look at me, just tapped her pen and muttered, "No change." She moved past quickly, her attention already on the next task. To her, I was background. To the hospital, I was an accessory to the real story. I had never felt more powerless, more dismissed. I tried to steady myself by walking the hall, but my eyes kept catching on the details. A file tucked into the pocket of his bed, a line on a chart that seemed out of place. I didn't touch it. I knew the rules, but I saw it. A name. Not mine. A name I'd never heard before. David Callahan. The sight was like being punched. My fiancé, the man who had sworn to marry me, the man I believed shared every corner of his life with me, had someone else written into his records as an emergency contact. Not me. Not the woman he called his family. A stranger. My knees felt weak, my pulse racing. Who was David Callahan? I walked back to the waiting area, forcing my breathing into shallow, even counts. The unfairness of it pressed on me from every direction. The hospital treating me like I didn't belong, the whispers about family I'd never heard of, the names scrawled into papers that should have held mine. For years, Daniel told me his only family was me. Now I knew he had been holding something back. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of fear. But holding it back all the same, that night I went home for the first time in days, unlocking the apartment door with shaking hands. The sight of our life together hit me harder than the silence of the hospital. His jacket still on the back of the chair, the wedding invitation stacked neatly on the counter, the ring box waiting on the nightstand. Every object felt different, like it was mocking me. I sank onto the couch and stared into the dark, wondering how much of what we had built was true and how much was only half a story. I didn't sleep. My mind ran in circles, turning over every moment with Daniel. His quick laugh when I teased him about being stubborn. The way he always said, "You and me, that's all we need." I used to hear that as comfort. Now I wondered if it was a cover, a way to keep the shadows from creeping in. By morning, something inside me had hardened. I wasn't going to sit outside another day while people whispered truths behind my back. I needed answers. Clear, spoken, undeniable. If Daniel couldn't give them to me now, then I would find them myself. I returned to the hospital, walking with a steadiness I didn't feel. I approached the desk, my voice calm but firm. "Is David Callahan listed as a contact for Daniel Evans?" The nurse blinked, hesitated, then replied, "I can't release that information, ma'am." Her lips said no, but her eyes gave me everything. That was enough. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I turned and walked away, each step clipped, deliberate. If the hospital wouldn't tell me who he was, I would find out on my own. The name was in my head now, sharp and unshakable. David Callahan. Whoever he was, whatever he meant to Daniel, he carried the answers I needed. I walked out of St. Joseph's, the midday sun blinding, my body moving on instinct. I wasn't just Daniel's fiancé anymore. I was the one left with questions, and I wasn't going to let silence keep them buried. I gripped the steering wheel of my car, the name echoing louder than the hum of traffic. David Callahan. And with that name, I drove out of Savannah toward a truth that had already started to unravel the life I thought I knew. I drove for hours with nothing but the sound of the tires and the name in my head, David Callahan. It wasn't just a name, it was a fracture line cutting through everything I thought was solid. The interstate bled into smaller roads, and the flat expanse of coastal marsh gave way to pines. My mind worked harder than the engine, turning over every memory of Daniel, searching for cracks I'd once ignored. He always said he had no one. He said his life started when he met me. Was that a lie? Or just the version of truth he wanted to live in? I pulled into Waycross just after noon, the sun burning the sidewalk pale. It was the kind of town where people still nodded when you walked by, but their eyes lingered a little too long, trying to place you. I stopped at a diner with peeling paint and a screen door that clattered when I pushed it open. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a pen tucked behind her ear, poured me coffee before I asked. I cleared my throat. "I'm looking for someone, David Callahan." She didn't blink, just tilted her head toward the window. "Garage out by County Road 7, rusted sign, can't miss it." The garage sat low against the fields, a metal roof sagging slightly, the kind of place that had been patched and repaired more times than it had ever been built. A man was bent over the hood of an old truck, wiping his hands with a rag that only spread the grease around. When he looked up, my breath caught. His eyes, blue, piercing, were the same shade as Daniel's axe. Not exact, but close enough to stop me cold. "Can I help you?" His voice was cautious, not unfriendly, but ready for trouble. I stepped closer, clutching my phone in my hand like proof. On the screen was the photo I had of Daniel, smiling, sunburnt from a day at Tybee, his arm around me. I held it up. "This is my fiancé. His name is Daniel Evans. He's in the hospital in Savannah. I found your name in his records. Who are you to him?" The rag slipped from his hand. For a moment he just stared, and I could see the recognition flicker behind his guarded expression. He let out a slow breath, shook his head like he was bracing himself, then said, "I think I'm his brother." The ground tilted beneath me. A brother. Not a cousin, not a friend, a brother. I swallowed hard, my voice sharper now. "He told me he didn't have family. He told me he was alone." The man David leaned against the hood, eyes distant. "That's how he grew up. But it wasn't the whole truth. Our father," he paused, jaw tightening. "Our father was a man who left damage everywhere he went. He had money but no loyalty. My mother raised me, his mother didn't stay. I was old enough to remember when she left the hospital with empty arms." His voice cracked. "Just for a second. That was him, that was Daniel." I gripped the photo tighter. Anger surged with the disbelief. Why wouldn't he tell me? Why would he build a life with me on silence? David looked at me then, steady, resigned. "Maybe because of our father, maybe because of the things his name carries. You think you know pain because he didn't tell you, but you don't know what it's like to live inside a name that poisons every room it enters. Ask your fiancé about Linda Turner." The name hit like a blow. My mother's friend Linda was a story I'd grown up with. A woman forced out of her home when I was a child, her land sold cheap to cover debts she didn't owe. The man behind it had been whispered about for years, a predator in business who crushed anyone weaker. My heart slammed. Could it be the same? Could Daniel's father, the ghost he never spoke of, have been the same man who destroyed lives, including people I knew? I stared at David, my throat dry. He nodded grimly. "He was our father. And if Daniel never told you, it's because he wanted to be more than that man's shadow. Maybe he thought he could bury it. But shadows have a way of following you." I turned away, the heat of betrayal rising in me like a fever. My fiancé had built a life with me, sworn we were everything to each other, but kept buried a truth that was tied not only to him, but to me. My mother, my childhood, my own scars. It wasn't just his secret, it was ours, even if I hadn't known it. I drove back to Savannah in silence, the road blurring as tears I refused to shed burned behind my eyes. Every mile closer to the hospital was a mile closer to a confrontation I didn't want but could no longer avoid. I thought of Daniel lying pale under white sheets, and I hated that love and anger could exist side by side in the same body. When I walked back into the ICU, he was awake, eyes half-lidded, his face drawn. He looked at me with relief, whispered my name like a lifeline. I sat beside him, my voice steady, but cold. "Why didn't you tell me you had a brother? Why didn't you tell me who your father was?" His expression shifted instantly from relief to dread. His lips trembled, his chest rising with effort. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Because I didn't want to lose you." But it was too late for that. In that moment, I knew we had already lost something we could never get back. I closed the door behind me, the sound of it clicking into place, sharper than it should have been. Daniel looked small in the bed, tubes at his arms, skin pale, but his eyes found mine the way they always had, like he could still read what I wasn't saying. Only this time, what I wasn't saying was heavier than anything we had carried before. I sat down beside him, not taking his hand. My voice came out steady, too controlled. "I met David." His face shifted instantly, like the words themselves pulled the strength out of him. His lips parted, but nothing came at first. Then, quietly, "You weren't supposed to—" His voice broke. "Not like this." "Not like this?" I repeated, my tone clipped. "How was I supposed to find out? From the doctor's whispering in the hallway? From a name on a file? Because that's how it happened. After all the years we've been together, after planning a wedding, after promising we tell each other everything, you let me find out you have a brother from strangers." His hand trembled as he tried to reach for mine. I stayed still. He let it fall back onto the blanket, his eyes searching mine, desperate. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "From him, from the past, from everything that name meant. I thought if I kept it buried, it would die there." I leaned forward, my words sharp, cold. "You didn't just keep it buried. You kept me out. You let me walk into a future with you without giving me the truth about where you came from. And it's not just any past, it's tied to my life, my family. Do you understand that?" His breathing quickened, the monitor beeping faster. "I do," he whispered. "I understand now. I thought I could shield you. And I was wrong. I thought if I chose silence, we could start fresh. I didn't realize silence was its own betrayal. For a moment, I almost softened because his voice was the same voice that had once promised me we'd face everything together. But then I thought of that day in the hallway, standing invisible while others were given answers. I thought of the years of questions he had dodged, the quiet ways he had let me believe he had no family when there was one only a town away. "You made a choice for both of us," I said finally. "And in doing that, you took away mine. That's what hurts. Not the past itself, not your father, not David, you." Tears slid down his temples, disappearing into the pillow. "I was afraid if I told you, you'd look at me and see him. You'd see the man who broke your mother's life. I couldn't bear it." I closed my eyes, fighting the ache in my chest. When I opened them again, I kept my voice level. "What you don't see is that by keeping silent, you made me see him anyway, because now I know the truth and it came to me as a lie." The room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the machines. Daniel's hand moved again, slowly, deliberately, until it rested near mine. His voice was rough, broken. "I love you. I never lied about that. If all I have left is the chance to prove it, then I'll take it. But please, don't leave me alone with this." I looked down at his hand, inches from mine, every instinct in me torn. Love and betrayal sat together in the same space, neither stronger than the other. For the first time in our life together, I didn't know which would win. I finally laid my hand on top of his. Not tender, not forgiving, just a contact, a reminder that I was still there. My words came out low, clipped. "I don't know what we are now, but I know one thing: we're not finished." He closed his eyes, his fingers tightening weakly around mine. I stared at him, at the man I had loved fiercely and trusted blindly, and felt the full weight of what the next days would demand of us. Because love might survive truth, but not without cost. Morning came in thin, honest light. I stood by Daniel's bed and watched him breathe without watching the monitor, because I wanted the truth from him, not from a line that blinked. He opened his eyes and found me. I pulled the chair close, not touching him yet. My voice was steady. "I heard the doctors. I found David. I know who your father is. I know what his name did to other people's lives. I can't live in a house where silence decides for us. I saw the hurt land, and I didn't soften it. If we go forward, there are rules. No shadows, no choosing for both of us. We tell the whole truth, even when it makes a day harder." He swallowed, nodded once, and said he would. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a chance to earn it. They discharged him 3 days later with instructions that sounded simple: rest, follow up, take it slow, but nothing about us felt simple. We took a cab home because driving felt like pretending. The apartment looked exactly the way we left it, and nothing like the place we'd lived in. He sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the stack of invitations on the counter. "We should move the date," he said. "We should move more than that," I answered. "We should move the way we do this." I made tea because I needed something in my hands. He watched the steam and told me pieces he'd kept tight for years. Where he slept when he was small, the homes that didn't last, the way he told himself work would make him belong to something. He told me he met David as an adult and thought he could keep that knowledge in a separate box from us. I listened until he was empty. Then I told my side. The exact feeling of being told to wait outside, the sound of doctors calling someone else real family, the name on the file that wasn't mine. I said it calmly so he couldn't pretend it was heat instead of hurt. "You didn't just hide a person," I said. "You hid my right to choose you, knowing everything." We wrote down what the next months required, not to frame or show anyone, just a record to point to when fear made facts slippery. We kept a copy. If one of us asked a question about the past, it would be answered. If the answer needed time, we would set a date to finish it and keep that date. If either of us felt the old reflex to protect by hiding, we would say it out loud in the moment, no matter how clumsy it came out. We agreed to postpone the wedding without a new day on the calendar. We would live the promise now and let a date follow later, if it should. We called David. He met us at a diner by the highway where the coffee was too strong and the booths were too close. He stood when we walked in, then didn't know where to put his hands. Daniel looked at him like a man looks at a mirror that never belonged to him. I told David the same thing I told Daniel: no shadows. He didn't give a speech. He said our Father's name was a door he had to walk through every day whether he wanted to or not, and if being in our lives meant never bringing that name into our home, he could do it. He looked at me and said he was sorry for the damage that man left behind, and that he knew apology didn't repair it. He asked where we wanted him to stand. I appreciated the question. We sat here on the edges until we understood the middle. The waitress called me hone and dropped off refills. Daniel told one small story from a foster house that made David laugh in a short, surprised way, and I realized I'd never heard that exact sound before. At home, the days stacked up plain and hard. He slept more than he liked, and hated that his hands shook when he tried to cook. I ran errands, kept the living room quiet, answered messages from the bookstore with short thanks and no details. He told me the things he had avoided. The first time he learned what his father's money could force. The first time he saw his own last name close a door. The first time he decided he would be a different kind of man. I told him the things I hadn't said out loud. The night I sat outside his room and felt erased, the way that erasure turned to anger the second I heard those whispers, how close I came to letting the anger decide everything. We didn't fix it in one talk. We built it in 100 small ones. There were stumbles. A neighbor mentioned Daniel's last name in a way that wasn't neutral, and I felt the old heat rise. Daniel started to apologize for being who he was, and I stopped him. "We're not apologizing for existing," I said. "We're responsible for what we do next." Another night, he held a detail back out of habit. Nothing big, just a meeting he'd had with David years ago, and I caught it in the cadence of his voice. He saw my face and corrected himself without prompting, finishing the story all the way to the end. We both heard the difference. It was a small win, and we needed small wins. When he felt strong enough, we drove to Tybee and sat in the car with the windows cracked. The ocean was loud and ordinary at the same time. We didn't make it a metaphor. We made it a place to say hard things without the walls listening. He asked what forgiveness meant to me if it ever came. I told him it would mean I stopped measuring the present against the day I heard those doctors. It would mean I didn't bring the file in my mind to every conversation. It would not mean forgetting. He nodded, like he could live inside that definition. I told him what I needed from him wasn't perfection. It was interruption, stopping the old habits before they carried us back to silence. He took that word seriously. After that, when I saw him pause at a truth, I'd say, "Interrupt it," and he would. We saw David again, this time for a slow walk by the river. He let us set the pace. When a woman glanced twice at Daniel like she recognized a story about a last name, David didn't stiffen or try to explain. He just stayed beside us. I told him directly that I didn't want the past in my house by accident. If there was a piece we needed to face, we would invite it in and set it on the table like anything else, and then we'd put it away. He said that sounded like a rule he could follow. Daniel watched us talk and looked relieved and tired at the same time. Work came back in small pieces. I went to the bookstore 2 afternoons a week. The manager handed me a stack of returns and said, "Do what you can." Daniel picked up a little sanding on a chair he'd started months ago and set it down when his hands said enough. Nights were plain, simple dinners, a short show we didn't have to follow closely, the quiet of 2 people learning how to live with a truth sitting in the room like furniture that had always been there but only now was named. Sometimes I caught him watching me to see if I was still here. Sometimes I was watching him too. One Sunday we walked to the oak where he had asked me to marry him. We didn't bring the ring box. We didn't make a speech. He stood in front of me and said, "I don't want to ask you to forgive me, because the asking makes it sound like a gift I'm owed. I want to tell you I'll do the work, whether you use the word or not." I looked at him, at the man I loved, at the man who had hurt me, at the man who was learning to be different, and I knew what my answer was. "I'm not handing out a word," I said. "I'm building a life where the word fits. I'm still here. That's my answer." He nodded and didn't try to make it bigger than it was. We kept the wedding off the calendar. We wore the small bands at home so our hands remembered what they were trying to promise. We told the truth when it cost a comfortable evening. We interrupted silence before it hardened. We visited David when it made sense and let days pass when it didn't. We made a rule about the last name. It belonged to a man who was not in this home. It would not decide who we were. When someone in town used it like a story, we answered with who we are now. Not speeches, just facts. There isn't a single day I can point to and say, "That's when it was fixed." It wasn't. It was lived. I stopped hearing the click of a hospital door every time I closed my eyes. He stopped breaking eye contact when the past came up. We had a bad Tuesday where I said I was fine and wasn't. We had a good Thursday where he told a hard truth before I asked. And it landed gently because it arrived early. I realized one morning while making coffee that I'd gone a whole week without replaying the hallway whisper, and I didn't write it down or mark it. I just noticed it and let the day continue. We did go back to the hospital months later for a routine check, and as we waited in the same corridor, I thought about the woman who sat here and felt erased. I wasn't her anymore. If someone had walked past and called for real family, I would have answered with my own name and my own terms. Not to fight, just to be counted. That night, we sat on the floor with the invitations. We didn't mail them. We didn't tear them up either. We put them back in the box and slid it onto the shelf where things go when they're not gone and not ready. We didn't need paper to tell us what we had decided. We needed days that matched our words. People ask what second chances look like as if they come as a moment. They don't. They're a practice. They're a choice you make in the kitchen on a Wednesday, when the easiest thing would be to hide a small thing to keep the evening smooth, and you don't. They're a boundary you hold even when you're tired. They're the way you speak about someone when they aren't in the room. They're the ring you wear in a house where no one else can see it because this isn't for them. I said goodbye to my fiancé in a hospital, and then I heard the doctors whispering. That was the day I learned a truth I didn't choose. This is the life we're building because of it. No shadows, no choosing for both of us, no past running the house unless we invite it in. I'm not promising perfect, I'm promising honest. And I choose him with the truth, or I don't choose at all.